probably in about 2020
Yeah.
on the north. Let's see, make sure all our table mics are on. We'll need a willing commissioner to call the meeting to order, which is just doing exactly that and stating, you know, the date of the meeting. So if one of you is willing to do that for the record, and then lead us through any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest to disclose.
Scott, you've been chair before.
Huh?
You've been the chair before.
Yeah, I don't remember. Seems like there's a paragraph here that I could read, man.
I think I don't know if we have the script on here, but however you go about it, it will just be helpful for the record to have the date of the meeting and then ask for commissioners to disclose any ex parte communication or conflict of interest.
Yeah, this is Thursday, June 27th, 2024. Architectural control, what do we call it?
Review commission.
Review committee meeting. Architectural, should we do the minutes? What do you want me to go?
Let's just have you ask if there's any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest to disclose.
Okay, is there anybody that needs to make a disclosure of interest?
Okay, sounds like you're good there. And then if you want to just take us, read off under 2.0, the business items.
Okay,
And you can feel free to read that whole introduction if you want for the record or up to you.
okay.
Yeah.
Notice is hereby given the Cottonwood Heights Architectural Review Commission will convene. I've already stated that June 27th. The meeting will be broadcast electronically on the city's YouTube channel. We welcome and acknowledgements, and we acknowledge there are no conflicts of interest to disclose. Business items, form-based code introduction as part of its general plan update process. The city is working on a form-based code, district, and ordinance. The city's consultant, Voda Landscape and Planning, will introduce the form-based code to the Architectural Review Commission at this meeting.
That's perfect. And I think we can break there and then we can hit the consent agenda afterward.
Okay.
So if it's all right with the commission, I'll just give a really brief background of this project. And then we have Mark Morris from Voda Landscape and Planning here with us, and he's going to do the bulk of kind of walking us through this draft. So back in 2020, the city council gave us direction as staff to look into doing a form-based code for a portion of Fort Union Boulevard's corridor, sort of in tandem with the general plan update, but as its own deliverable. And so we obviously engaged with the consultant, and over the past couple of years have been just actively working on a draft of that code. It's gone through various work sessions with the planning commission, the city council. We had a public open house in March of this year where we invited all the affected property owners to come together. We're able to respond to questions and feedback at that meeting. And then it went to planning commission in June for a formal vote. The commission unanimously voted to forward a recommendation of approval to the city council, and we'll be taking it to the city council in July. So we wanted to bring it to this group tonight to just kind of give you an overview of what the code is. The ARC is involved in some projects in this code area, depending on whether the developer is asking for any sort of deviation from the standards. And so we do expect that assuming the form-based code gets adopted and as properties redevelop in that boundary, we expect we'll be bringing some of the projects to this group. And just wanted to kind of brief you on what that might look like. So do you think there's anything else background wise we need to cover?
No, that's great.
Okay, and we do have our chair, Scott Peters, here now. Scott, we have Mark Morris here from Voda Landscape and Planning, and he's our consultant for the form-based code. So I'll go ahead, Mark, and pull up the slides that you've prepared. Maybe I'll just give you, yeah, and then you can, I feel like it's always a little wonky to be like queuing. So let's make sure it comes up, and then let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. I'm missing it. Oh, full screen. There we go. It just takes a second to catch up. That may be a little better.
Sure.
There's that, and then if you would like the mouse at all, it is
Great, good to be with you tonight. Like Samantha said, my name is Mark Morris. I'm the principal at Voda Landscape and Planning. We've been working with the city for a while now on developing a form-based code for few areas on the Fort Union Boulevard corridor. What we wanted to do tonight was introduce form-based code to this group and talk about your role going forward in reviewing applications for some of these areas. So not sure if any of you have heard of form-based code before. Really, it is a different approach to land regulation for cities. The intent is to focus on the form of the development. So it is not, these are not architectural guidelines. These are not really focused on any specific style of architecture. That's not the intent. It's really looking at how does the form of this development help with achieving community goals. So typically in a process like this, we start with what are the goals pulled from the city's general plan, other documents, and how do we bake that into the cake, as it were, to make sure that the big pieces that would contribute to achieving those goals would be accomplished. So really, it's an implementation tool. Broadly, form-based code really focuses on improving walkability and imageability of a community. So looking at how do we take areas that might redevelop, and whenever that parcel owner chooses to redevelop, what sort of code is going to regulate that redevelopment. So as you know, most code today focuses on use. Use is a consideration in the form-based code, but it's not the first question. It's not, oh, this is R1 or C1, or really it's looking at how do we give property owners a some broad flexibility on with how their property develops, and really focus on what are the things that are going to be on this property long after we're all gone, long after this property owner is gone. How do we make sure the development is reusable as far as use goes without having to tear down and start over? On the right, you'll see I mentioned it allows for a variety of uses. The focus really is on building location on property as far as site planning goes. The form and where the entrances to buildings are located to make sure they face important streets and contribute to the street. More options of use for property owners who want to develop. So in the code itself, there's really a table. It's not saying, okay, this is only this one thing. It's really saying, what is the market telling us is in demand? As you know, we look at old cities or parts of cities, buildings stay pretty much where they are, and uses change, if not every 10 years, every 20 or so years, uses of buildings very rarely stay the same. One thing we wanted to underscore is that existing uses and existing businesses are unchanged. So really, this is only applied when redevelopment comes along. In the code, there are some triggers. So if someone is trying to, double the size of their building or do things to an existing structure, there is certainly a ceiling past which they would have to come into compliance with the form-based code. But as far as anyone who is doing what they're doing today, any existing businesses, in no way would they be forced to come into compliance with this. So, any questions so far?
I'd say that, and this is a new thing. I mean, this is something they're just introducing, or
I'll skip forward a couple slides. It's new-ish, we'll say. First form-based codes were developed about 25 years ago, so it's something that's been implemented across the country for quite a long time. These are some cities on the bottom page of the page here, cities around us that are using the form-based code and kind of how long they've been using the code. Salt Lake City was the first to adopt form-based code in 2006. And many cities thereafter. This isn't every city in the state, but these are cities that I have some connection with and that we consulted during the development of the form-based code.
It is new to Cottonwood Heights. We don't have any existing form-based code areas today. It's something that if the city likes how it goes, could it be replicated in other areas of the city? It's certainly possible, but this is kind of the first case study of trying here, is this boundary in Fort Union, and Mark's pulled up the map here to show that.
And the code itself is very context specific, it's context sensitive, so you can't just pick up someone's code next door and apply it here, which is really how most cities' existing code was created. So as Sam mentioned, most cities, once they've gotten their kind of the hang of form-based code, they start looking at other areas of the city to apply it. And I know in Cottonwood Heights, there are several places that would certainly be good candidates for that. Existing residential areas are really never, form-based code is rarely if ever applied to a place like that. If it's already developed, it's already single family, you're not gonna go in and really see much change. That change is gonna be pretty granular. So this code really focuses on 3 key nodes along Fort Union, where we know redevelopment is happening. We know there's a lot of development pressure that's going to continue over the next 20 years. How do we make sure the code is updated to get what we want out of these areas?
But not going all the way up to Wasatch.
Correct, yeah, it caps right now at Hillside Plaza at 23rd East. So this is kind of, again, the test limits of it, and the context certainly changes as you go farther on Fort Union. Maybe in the future, we add that in and write some standards for that section.
Part of the rationale for that is a handful of years ago, the council changed the long range land use plan east of 2030s to be future land use of residential. Whereas before it was like low scale commercial along Fort Union there. So they stepped it back, and form-based code typically isn't residential development ordinance, it's for this kind of commercial redevelopment areas.
And
Yeah, but with the gravel pit.
Yeah.
Canyon and all that, I mean, that's about as hot as it could be.
Yeah, and the gravel pit has the planned development district ordinance, which is not a form-based code, but is more similar to a form-based code than our other zones where it's based on context. They're given parameters and flexibility to work within it, and then that goes through the council process. So we feel okay about the tools that are existing at the gravel pit, but certainly as was mentioned, this is built to, we could add modules onto this over time and expand it.
in a place like the gravel pit, I'd say is a really good candidate for form-based code at some point. Any other commercial areas, even if they're small, things along Bengal, if it's even some kind of commercial, anything that's gonna be developed, there's a high candidacy for form-based code.
What unique guidelines do they have that they don't presently have in
Who's
the
that?
city?
Well, that's why we're here.
Yeah, so typical land use code is really, okay, here's the use, and you bring us a site plan and we'll talk about it. This really gets into more detail on where the buildings need to be located, what those setbacks, what requirements are. There are elements here of landscape requirements, a lot of design elements that really are absent from your current land use code.
It also does build on some of what's in the design guidelines for our Gateway Overlay District, which is what you guys are currently reviewing projects under. But it adds more specificity to that. So instead of just having something really broad, like entrances should encourage walkability, there's an actual spec given to how the entrance should be oriented. And so that makes it, I think, much more implementable for staff to check a project's compliance and for the developer side to understand what's being asked. But again, it still does leave open the freedom of architectural style. So it's not getting into that. It's more saying, like Mark's mentioned, the location of the building on the property, how are the entrances oriented, what's the pedestrian space? It puts some more teeth to that, which I think will be an advantage of this code.
And learning a form-based code is very much like learning a new language, just because we're used to kind of the way we talk about development and code review and things like that. So it takes a little bit of time to get there. to be clear, you're not expected to review projects for the full form-based code. As an architectural review committee, your role really is staff brings to you in the development application. Your review would be if there's some element in that application that doesn't quite meet the form-based code. And your intent as designers are to come up with a design solution that is both acceptable to the city and acceptable to the applicant. So really, your review is going to be very narrowly focused on some aspect of the application. You don't need to understand the full breadth of the code itself any more than, staff is expecting you to do all of that currently. But again, these aren't architectural standards. They're really focused on form of development. And so architectural style, all those types of things, like it leaves a lot of flexibility for property owners to decide for their architectural. The code, again, this is not a master plan. It's really something that happens incrementally over time. And so there are cities around Cottonwood Heights that have been using a form-based code for some time, and we can kind of see the output that they're getting. During the development of this code, we consulted with several of them to kind of understand what are the things we need to avoid, what are the things that are successful, what sort of things have you had to adjust or revise. Every city finds, a thing that's unique to that city that in a couple of years you'll say, we need to be able to adjust this in the form-based code, and that's very, very much to be expected. And so the kind of consulting with other cities, I think, has helped us to draft a code that we hope will avoid those. But again, it's what you don't know that we don't know that it's going to be. So
And it sounds like notably, Murray is now just starting this process. So they're not on this list as a completed form-based code, but it's been interesting to even just in the time that we've been looking at it, see like other neighboring cities start to be working on this type of an element to their code. So that's kind of exciting.
yeah, and I think it really comes down to cities seeing the kind of development product of it is being gotten through form-based code. Like I said, it takes a little time to get there, but we helped Midvale City adopt the form-based code in 2019. And so if you go to the historic Main Street today, you'll see there are several buildings under construction that were really permitted through a form-based code. Theirs was very specific to Midvale's Main Street. They had historic structures that they're trying to make sure infill fits into. But again, the development of form-based code is very context specific. So Mill Creek City, they're building a new town center. So the hope is that the Hillside Plaza project kind of becomes the kind of catalytic project that it will be developed using that form-based code. Hopefully we'll learn some things and maybe to make some adjustments there with kind of how the code works.
Yeah, it'll be a unique opportunity to maybe be the first project coming out of a code we also adopt. So I think, like Mark mentioned, we'll probably learn some takeaways from that. And I think that's actually really cool because we don't always see the tension points as staff since we're not developers. And so then to be on that side of experiencing, okay, we need to develop within our own standards, we may be exposed to some pinch points that we otherwise wouldn't have been. So I'm sure we'll be coming back in a matter of time and saying, we've made some changes, we've revised the code, but we feel like the draft we have is ready to get us going.
Yeah, no, it's great.
It's just kind of part of reanalyzing the use in the city and looking for the future where certain developments that this becomes, commercial, higher development, higher density area and trying to formulate what can happen to the city. Right now, we're just sort of building
Yes,
a little
exactly.
bit, but you go in and say, like you do a little bit with the commercial development, but is to say this district is a commercial district with a higher density, or this is, a park district or something, where you literally try to put down a marker that this is where you would like to be in 20 years and encourage people to, it's tough in this city because everything is kind of developed. And But maybe, I mean, we still have these houses up and down, Fort Union, and if we could all get rid of them, we'd all be happy, I think. Maybe not, speaking for myself, but,
I'll second that.
but if we, I know we can't, but if we put a marker down that this has a high development district. And the developers will start looking at that opportunity. And start gathering up and get the prices for these places to disappear. Is this part of what,
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a lot of things that it can accomplish. I think it does create a really desirable development area for a developer to work under because it has a greater flexibility of use. So it doesn't, like what you're talking about of having a specific like commercial area and park area, it doesn't do that. The use is very flexible. But I think that makes it appealing for somebody who today can't do what they want to do because our code is very, very prescriptive about specific business types. So it opens up use, but at the same time, it also creates predictability with the form of the development you get. So like what you're talking about today, you drive up and down Fort Union, it's these like disparate parts, feeling very, very much of like a hodgepodge, and the form-based code can help create a more predictably cohesive feel along a corridor where the buildings that come out of that and the projects that come out of that, the uses are going to come and go and change over time as businesses do, but you're left with a high quality built environment that can accommodate that fluctuation. And I think that's
but it's
a good
like,
thing.
let's say there's a building and it's a dental operation or something, and they want to expand. But it's simply the wrong thing. This district is for high use, let's say. That for them to come in and say, we want to do a 50% expansion or something. Would that be denied because we have a bigger use for that? You're simply. Right now, you will let them kind of expand along, and you can do it in this soft way. You have little landscaping, you have a front door, you have, the flagpoles, so you okay. To me, there's something missing. We're not seeing the picture of what that should be and allowing this small increase. And somehow, you can't take somebody out right now, but if they're trying to do something to say, no, we really don't want you here.
It doesn't prescribe specific uses, but it does for new development, prescribe a slightly denser minimum. So we now have a minimum number of stories, not just a maximum.
Okay,
So,
yeah, I mean.
yes, it does
yeah,
support a little bit more
Yeah,
of kind of a town center feel where you're getting a little bit emphasis on little more density put in, but no, it's not gonna say, the use you're specifically proposing of this clinic is not the specific one we want. It's more focused on,
well, it's not a
mass
clinic,
building.
it's just that we are kind of allowing, some increase, and it's really not what we want. We want something bigger than this.
yeah, I think this will help with that.
Yeah,
In general, I think there's some language in here that says if you're adding onto a building. And there's different levels of this, you have to step closer towards complying with form-based
Yes.
code as you
Yeah.
go.
If you're doing like an interior remodel, it doesn't trigger it. If you're
No.
maintaining your building, it doesn't. We are very much a property rights state where we need to balance, the vision we have as a city with the rights private property owners possess. But it does have triggers that say if you're doing these things to your building, even if you're not leveling the site at a certain point, you do have to come closer into conformance. So I think anything we do is gradual, and that's hard, but I do think we've seen form-based codes produce relatively quickly with some great development.
And I think to your question, I think, the value of a property, if the city says we would allow higher density or we would allow more intensive development, that puts a little economic pressure on, okay, if I've got a 3,000 square foot dental office that's one story and it's sitting on an acre, that's a lot of value built into that. And so eventually the price will be right to say, let's redevelop this. It's not to say the dentist can't be there, but it's to say, okay, if this is multi-story, we have some height minimums, we get a little bit of an increase in.
yeah, but don't let them add another 2,000 square feet to the building.
Right,
You,
yeah. So
you're kind of playing the game that you're there, but we want to have a higher use there.
Yeah, and as we've said, the use is a pretty flexible option for the property owner. But it definitely gives more incentives to have some higher intensity economic output.
Yeah.
The city doesn't have, endless amounts of space that could be
Right.
commercial redevelopment, and so you want to use that wisely.
We're kind of an infill city, aren't we?
You're an
Sure.
interesting, yeah, and so you've got a couple big, redevelopment parcels like the gravel pit, but for the most part, these are gonna be incremental changes. Even places, we've included the area where Target and Home Depot and all of that is, someday that will redevelop. And so really you have a huge amount of land. How does that get redeveloped in a way that it's more than just a big box in a parking lot? It's not to say that the city has any sort of timeline on changing that use. It's just to say, the economics of all businesses change over time. How do we make sure that we have reusable physical infrastructure as opposed to, there's only so many businesses that can take over a Home Depot, 150,000 square foot building. How do we make sure that we're building things that are reusable and, accomplishing goals?
It's interesting that you mentioned Midvale, because just a couple of weeks ago, I drove by those buildings that are being built down there. There's some really nice apartment houses that are being built. But obviously the city's required them to put retail on the main floor. And retail on the main floor, the way that existing Main Street is in Midvale, would be suicide. I would be very shocked anybody's going to lease those bottom spaces.
I think you'd be surprised. The city, I think, to some of the things we've been talking about, the city kind of investing seed money to kind of economically revitalize an area. Their Main Street has been pretty quiet and.
Now it's on the north end, so it's, yeah, but
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting, it will be interesting to see what
Yeah,
kind of retail could go in there and survive.
well, I know they just announced, I think last week, Cactus and Tropicals was opening
Oh, really?
a new location on their Main Street. I think
It's a big
They're-
anchor.
Yeah, I think the city's doing a lot that everyone sees potential
Yeah.
in their Main Street. But in 2019, when we were working on their form-based code, I mean, the vacancy was
It was-
like 50%.
Yeah, kind of. Bordering on like
Yeah.
shuttered.
Oh, there's a lot of shutter.
Yeah.
So they're definitely, the city's investing some money and some vision. They're rebuilding the infrastructure of
Uh-huh.
as well, but
Or maybe they're making them, some kind of,
I think there were some,
taking some latitude that helps the developer, I don't know.
some parking accommodations that were. I think you were telling something about some parking that they had to work through. The details are probably
Yeah, so-
tangential to the.
Yeah, so Midvale's RDA Invest, they have loan programs and.
Oh, do they? Yeah,
and
they
Financial
got-
assistance,
yeah.
and if you meet their vision, they'll help you out.
Yeah.
There's-
Invest in that
It's a little
to
different.
raise it up, yeah.
We do have the visibility on Fort Union.
Right,
To hold up ground level
right.
commercial.
But we've also kind of tried to concentrate that at these nodes so that the corridor in between these key intersections. We're understanding is a little more pass through, like you're gonna naturally have more people congregating at these intersections than you would on just the linear corridor of Fort Union. So that has been a cool thing about the form-based code is that it has some different districts within it that have slightly different metrics depending on what part of that corridor you're in. So I think it's calibrated pretty well to understand like this is more of a passing through type of area. You're not gonna have as much ground floor visibility as you will somewhere like 23rd, where people are hopefully gonna be milling about and stopping and interacting. So I hope that we're right.
yeah, and I think this absorption rate of retail has changed drastically in the last
Yeah.
10 years. And so I think there are certain nodes where commercial retail is gonna be viable and certain places where that's just not gonna be viable. And so that's one of the discussions we've had about these nodes. Some of these nodes are regional retail, people are driving many miles to come to Target and Home Depot. Coming to 23rd, retail that would be at 2030s, that would be very focused on Conroe Heights, the neighborhoods around it. You're gonna have a different dynamic there, and that's the form-based code tries to allow for those options to be successful in these places.
Wonder if we should walk through kind of like the admin part of it with that
Sure.
workflow.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what I was
Yeah,
thinking.
yeah, of course. So one of the intents with a form-based code is to make the process more clear for everyone. You know, the city's code is, thousands of words that we all have to kind of use a divining rod to understand what this means from somebody who wrote it or what the legal team thinks it means. So the form-based code really is a far more graphic code where there are images and diagrams that illustrate the requirements. The intent is that if you look on the left side here, the intent is that you have this code, it's illustrated in a way that if a property owner is talking to their architect, their landscape architect, anyone who's involved with the design of that project has a clear understanding of what the code is requiring them to do. You can see on the bottom right here, this is a worksheet that basically an applicant would be given this worksheet in a pre-application meeting. So they would sit down with city staff. City staff would give them, here's an understanding of what the form-based code is. Having kind of a discussion about vision of why this area is special, why it has a different code applied to it. And the worksheet really gives them a step-by-step way to kind of prepare their application. Once they've submitted this number 2, once they've submitted a formal application to the city, that formal application is really that worksheet filled out and kind of showing how they're meeting each of those requirements.
Would you think that most developers will look at this as more restrictive?
It depends. It depends on their take on things. I think a lot of the cities that are using form-based code are getting good feedback because of that predictability. I think when you walk in and you're a developer or property owner, you want to know what it is that you're being asked to do. And I think a process like this is very clear to say, here's what we're requiring of you. If you've met that, check, that you're done.
I think it also is beneficial again, in that it opens up more possible tenants for a building, whereas today we have people coming in being like, well, I have one person who's interested in doing this highly specific thing, and we have to say, sorry, in that zone, that's not listed. And that can be really frustrating for somebody either wanting to construct a project or a broker wanting to build space. And so I think one point of feedback I've heard from it, and it's certainly not everybody who loves form-based code, but it's like, oh, I would have more options for my property. That makes it easier to fill the space, which I think is desirable.
And that review process, really the planning staff from the city goes through, make sure that each of those requirements is met. Rarely is there a project that comes in and it is, check marked all the way down. And so what the planning staff would then do would be to come to this body and say, okay, we have this project, here are the things where they've met all of those requirements. Here are 2 things that they're saying they can't meet, or for a special reason, they don't want to meet that requirement. Having a design discussion about that. So I sit on a review board for Farmington City that has a form-based code around the front station up there. And so when we convene, it's really talking about, okay, planning staff has presented an application. Here are the 2 things that we need to talk through and come to a consensus with the applicant. I would say 9 times out of 10, we come to an agreement. There's always one thing. Mountain America Credit Union refused to bring their door to the street side of the building, and in the end, the city allowed it. But that was really, it's a design discussion. And so this group, with your design expertise, being able to say, here are the things that we really care about in the form-based code. How do we come to some agreement, whether it's setback or building height? Having that conversation as designers to come to an agreement. And making a recommendation back to the city to say, if they make these changes, we recommend you approve, or if they don't make these changes, we recommend you reject the application. One thing to point out, I have a map we'll look at. In the current code, there are certain properties, if they meet the form-based code and certain requirements, they could have an administrative approval. One of the intents, again, of this process was to determine if there are projects of certain types that meet our goals, how do we fast track those applications? In order to reward those who are saying, yes, well, we'll do these things and, we want to go through quickly. When you're developing, time is money. And so how do we get those, off the table of the planning commission and the city council and really focus that attention on the bigger redevelopment projects. This map, a little bit easier to see on this one here. The GIS group here at the city did an analysis of these nodes to kind of say, okay, which of these parcels could potentially be approved administratively. On the left there, you see the current parameters as established by the code. It basically, an administrative approval would be possible. One, if the development parcel is smaller than 1 acre. So all of the smaller blue parcels are those that are under 1 acre in these areas. The structure size is below 20,000 square feet. And the development is located in 3 of the form district types. So we have a form district in the code that all of those would not be allowed administratively, but if it's in one of those 3 district types, that it could be approved.
The one that's accepted there where it would have to go through like a non-staff process is if it's in the residential transition area. So that's more like backing up onto existing neighborhoods where there's more of an impact on neighbors. Again, this doesn't affect any existing single family properties. It only properties that are in the proposed boundary are those that are already commercial, multifamily, or mixed use. So it doesn't change single family lots, but where it like abuts up against a single family area, we've said we feel like those projects should come through more of a public facing process. And it's more strict in those areas as far as like your height goes, it steps down. So I think that's a nice buffer into those areas.
So potentially these parcels could be in that administrative approval process. Also, they would have to meet all of the requirements. So there's a lot of things in order to get there, but if someone is motivated to have a faster approval process, there's a path to do that. And this is intentional. Again, there are some pretty large parcels here that if they were to redevelop, like Hillside Plaza and others, really that's where time should be spent. If it's under 1 acre, it's a relatively small project, it's meeting all the requirements. We want to make sure we're rewarding the development that's helping to meet those.
You know how big that Mill Creek project?
Their town center.
Yeah,
Their city center,
yeah.
the entire area was
Basically condemned the whole area, right? I mean,
they didn't
Yeah.
condemn anything. They went in and the city purchased a large amount of land there. And then the city basically built a public space, city hall, and then they're partnering with private development to build mixed use around that.
The issue is there's a fault line that runs through there, and so they buffered the fault line. And the city has created the plaza over the fault line
oh, really?
as a public space, yeah.
Oh. Interesting.
So, our responsibility, was in the Gateway District who you were responding to. Is this changing?
That's a great
Yeah.
question. Yeah, so I did a little analysis with our mapping department to say how many properties that are today in the Gateway are also in the form-based code area. And it's the majority, so it's most of the ones that would be coming to you under Gateway will, depending on the metrics we just went through of, are they under a certain size? Are they in these certain areas? Would still come to you. There are a couple kind of random ones in the Gateway District that are not in this. So you may still get a few.
Keeping both, I'm wondering, what?
Yeah, it's just because we had to start somewhere. So there's still a few kind of random ones up near to like Canyon Center. But there's also a development agreement for that property. So I don't know that it would really be super consequential. All of this is to say, I think the majority of projects we'll be bringing to this body are going to be in this form-based code area, but from time to time, we may still get an odd man out that's either in the residential office zone that requires our approval, or it's in a gateway area that's not encompassed by this. But we very early on kind of saw form-based code as, maybe this is a next iteration of that gateway area. And again, if we like what comes out of it, then maybe we try to replicate it elsewhere in the city. So we'll always, as staff, do the legwork to kind of prime you with like, this is a form-based code one, this is an old guard under the gateway district, but I don't think many of them will be gateway. If this is adopted by the city council.
So as I look at the map and I see the blue parcels, a lot of those blue parcels, all of them are in the gateway overlay district. So regardless of whether or not they meet the threshold for administrative approval, would they need to come through the ARC
Great
because they're in
question.
the gateway district?
Great question. We would be replacing the gateway district with the form-based code on those properties. So no, they would not. We felt like it was kind of confusing to have two different sets of standards governing it. And so they would not come through that process.
And one of the first things we did during this process was to go through the design standards of the gateway overlay, the mixed use
Yeah.
zone. So we went through and made sure we were covering the intent of each of those design requirements. But as Sam mentioned, like we didn't want to have, confusing layers of review and really to say, okay, how can we make the form-based code accomplish the spirit of the design standard in the gateway overlay?
So one of my initial concerns is a lot of those blue areas are the things that we have seen being developed and come before us over the last 10 years.
Sure.
And so do I understand that potentially none of those would come before us
If they were to redevelop again, ones that already have come to you?
that are in blue? That
Yeah, they would still go through the full staff review and have to comply with all the form-based code things, but unless they needed a deviation in design from those, no, they wouldn't come to the public meeting. And again, it's sort of an effort to try to say like, can we try to streamline some of the process if you're complying with everything in the code? But there is an obvious trade-off of, yeah, it doesn't mean that everything would come to the meeting. I think it can mean that then there's more bandwidth in certain ways to focus on the larger ones, but it objectively is a change.
I personally would require some kind of architectural review for those, because that is the area that we really want to focus on. I want to see those areas in blue develop consistently with the vision. And I get it, staff is gonna do the administrative review and ensure that they meet all the requirements. So if they meet the requirements, they're done, but that's just a suggestion that I would strongly consider. I mean, the blue is where a lot of the heart, you look at the two, especially on the right. That's where it's happening.
I think, it's probably up to who you're asking. My belief is that because the form-based code has been fine-tuned as far as what the requirements are, I do believe that if projects comply with that, I think they'll be good, strong projects that meet the goals of those areas.
Sure.
But certainly, yeah, it is a big change and maybe that's also something that if we don't like what we're getting out of that, we look back and we say we can revise that. Like Mark was saying, I think there's always room to come back and say this needs to be tweaked.
I will say, for someone to hit all the requirements and get that administrative approval, I think it is possible. I'd say it's probably rare that will happen without this group. Even if it's something pretty minor, I think there would be.
So it's gonna be compromises.
There will be compromises, but I think the intent is that the designers are the ones having that conversation, not the planning commission.
So are we adjudicating between developer and staff?
No, you're providing your expertise on
I
what
just-
design solution you feel would
But it's only
meet the
what,
goals.
if you have issues and develop an issue, you'll bring it to us.
So if they can't meet the requirements in the code. If there's something where they say like, we can't meet this exactly to the letter. One of the reasons it would come to you would be to say, we have an expert panel here who are versed in design, let's talk about something that would work. Let's come to a solution as an alternative, because that's not something we can do as staff, we're not designers. So that's where we would turn to your expertise to weigh in.
I think that would play out fairly similar to how a lot of the things the ARC reviews today play out, where you're. I know in the plan development district ordinance, the ARC looks at certain elements of that. If a building protrudes above a certain height, then you look at that. So that's kind of. This commission's role today is not full land use entitlement, but looking at certain elements of it. It's done in a different way, but. As Sam and Mark have mentioned, we're building a lot more language into the ordinance. There's no language in the ordinance today on the building form. It's, what's the use? How much parking is there? Is there a landscape buffer? What are the setbacks? That's it. I mean, essentially. So then we have this supplemental process today of, okay, now let's look at the design and form of the building through the ARC, because it is an important area. We're not trying to build those standards into the code up front from the get-go. So the code you'll see is, it's like 100-some pages long, as opposed to 2 pages of setback standards today. So we feel it's a good trade-off. Some of these little small properties.
For 100 pages.
Yeah, we should. Well, where the ARC has, we've had some meetings, and I think the ARC has played a really important role, but sometimes, we're in here talking about, how does a material around the corner on a dental office, and we think we can solve a lot of those, the smaller things by an ordinance. So like Sam said, we are spending our time on bigger projects that have more of that impact on the community.
Interesting to know from your perspective that a lot of them will still come, because I was kind of thinking like, oh, people will certainly just try to meet everything and do it, but it's interesting to hear that in past circumstances, it does still end up coming.
Yeah, and I think it's, if someone can see that there's a faster process than going through all the discussions and planning and all that. I think if it's something where they have to come to a review committee and get, they make a recommendation, I think that's a relatively fast
Yeah, that's true.
process compared to.
Planning commission, yeah, there's multiple meetings today.
Um,
So it is kind of much one more thing. So sorry to cut you off. I was gonna say it's a little different too, in that it actually comes to the ARC first. So some of the other projects, not all of them, but some of the ones that come to you guys today first start with the planning commission, and it can be a little wonky because it's like, well, who's reviewing what? That's planning commission. No, this is the ARC. And so this is a little different where they would come to you first, and we'd ask for your feedback there. And then I believe it's only if a resolution can't be reached at the ARC level, then it progresses to additional discussion. But I think there's some good news there too, where hopefully it means resolutions are found more quickly and the project can move on. Sorry, Mark, what were you gonna say?
The last thing I was going to mention, in general, form-based code focuses on the parts of the development that are really hard to change. So where is the building sited? How does that frontage address the street? This is in no way meant to be design guidelines that spell out specific colors or materials or things that in the scheme of things are quite easy to update. You can buy a building, change its facade in a weekend, and you've got a different, architectural statement. Really, the code focuses a lot more on the form, how that building addresses the street, how is it contributing to the public realm. It's not to say that materials are not part of it, but it's really focusing on the larger questions of how that development is. As a group of designers, I think if you have the opportunity to kind of use your expertise to help reconcile, every development is different. Every development is going to find something that is like, we can't quite get to this. How do we come to a resolution with a design approach? Really is an effective way to get there that helps the planning staff to kind of help people along. Okay.
That actually tells me it's even more important that it comes before the ARC if we want to have an influence on that kind of thing.
Sure. What additional questions does this group have?
No, let's try it.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Absolutely.
But I mean, as far as the cities, I mean, I had a little bit in the middle of one in Salt Lake City, form base, you know, how they do stuff and, you know, it's created a little bit different approach to it. Away from just, use. I mean, the use zoning that we all had lived with, you know, didn't work very well.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Well, just kind of procedurally, its next step will be, we'll be going back to city council on July 2nd. The council's been involved throughout the process at different checkpoints to kind of give feedback, but we'll be bringing it back to them now that we have a final draft. And then it'll get scheduled, the way council meetings work, it usually goes a couple times, so it'll get scheduled again for a public hearing and opportunity for additional comment. And then at some point, they will take a vote on it. I'm hoping a vote is taken end of summer or early fall, depending on the schedule. So we will certainly keep you posted on it. We're not tonight asking for a certificate of design compliance to be issued since it's not a specific development, but wanted to brief you guys on it and also get the feedback from this group. So is there anything else?
One other
you wanna
thing to
cover?
mention, as part of this code development, we developed a prototype. Prototype is really a parcel that was selected as, here's an example of how form-based code would play out on a specific site. That prototype you'll probably see when staff come to you and say, you know, here's the requirement. It's a graphic representation of the requirement and how it's illustrated on the site. That's something that the intent is that that can be used to kind of clarify both for the, you know, property owner developer side, the planning commission or this group is reviewing. That prototype is a tool that can be used throughout. So we've got that as kind of part of the code as well. It's not to say here's exactly how this parcel will develop, but it's something that shows the flexibility of the code.
Is this like a national movement?
It is. The first form-based code was developed in Florida and it's kind of spread all over. As I showed, it's been in Utah about 20 years now. So there's a lot of cities that have kind of learned how to implement it. Inevitably, you know, in 2 years, you'll say, okay, here are the two parameters that we're having the most grief with. How do we adjust those? In Clearfield, when we talked to them, they had an open space requirement for every development. And it proved to be very problematic. And so they were in probably about 18 months into using their form-based code, and they went in and said, we need to take that out because that's causing most of our problems. And so you'll find something, the code is not done forever. It's really just saying, here's where we start. As you get into it, you'll find things that.
So are we rezoning or
Yeah,
designating
Great question.
that is be an FB number 1 or FB number 2?
We've got some really good questions tonight, yes. Yeah, so it will be actually a rezone. So the way it's noticed to all property owners, we sent individual notices to every address, is as a rezone, but it wouldn't, like we talked about at the beginning, it wouldn't require anyone to proactively change their property. It just would be if they went to redevelop, we'd say, hey,
Yeah.
property got rezoned, do it under these parameters. So as far as how it shows up on a map, I imagine it would be, like FBC1 or
FB,
something like that. So whole new color in the color
And the
scheme of our map.
The boundary limit that we drew here for the form-based code, we took the things that are currently zoned for mixed use already. So we wanted to make it as clean of a kind of transition as possible. But that rezone hopefully makes it clearer where there isn't several layers of, you know, kind of regulations on each.
What do you think the response has been by most developers? It's just another, are they positive about it or
Yeah, I mean, I think there are developers that have learned how
to work with them?
Well, how it benefits them for sure, like we've mentioned, like that use flexibility, I think is huge for a lot of developers. Because for a city to come in and say, we want this use here no matter what, doesn't really recognize market conditions and what's in demand and what's gonna pencil. And so I think to have a piece of land that you say, oh, as long as I meet this form, I can do you know, here's a whole list of things that are possible. There's still uses that are not allowed, you know, you
Yeah.
don't want every use, you know, to be a vape shop or what have you. So there's certain things that are still regulated in that way as far as uses go, but it's a broader category. It's to say, okay, this could be housing, this could be commercial, really letting kind of market forces drive.
The Sugar House in this,
There are parts of Sugar House that are using the form-based code. They use it along the streetcar corridor in Sugar
The
House.
S line.
They use it along 400 South in downtown Salt Lake City.
Notably, the form-based code doesn't allow drive-throughs. So that is one thing that
doesn't allow
does
drive-throughs.
not allow drive-throughs. So that's when you talk about, okay, there are some things as far as use goes that it doesn't allow. There's kind of your
It's funny,
classic.
COVID showed that was the most important thing a retail business could have.
It's certainly still, you know, other areas in the city that can, but
Yeah.
as far as new development goes in a form-based code,
Oh, wow.
that would not be, so.
Yeah, it is a code, I mean, ordinance, I mean, with setbacks and heights and use and.
Yeah.
Parking access, I mean, it has,
It does,
it's a rewriting
It
the building code or the
Zoning
zoning
ordinance.
code.
it does,
Rethinks it.
and the parking was an interesting thing because we wanted to make sure there was still enough parking. Parking is important and I think we all benefit from convenience of parking, but we do have a considerable amount of development that is overparked with really big parking lots that are not used. And so I think we struck a good balance there where it says you still have parking requirements, but there's opportunities for shared use parking depending on time of day. And I think that will be good. So again, we tried to look at the design guidelines and say, how do we incorporate these in where we can? But I do think it would be good if you guys do have feedback, if you can send it to me, if you can share it with me. Scott's been taking notes, so if that's something you can.
I take notes because it helps me like get stuff in
If
my.
there are things
Yeah.
that you are wanting to provide feedback on, if that's something you can send to me, I think it is helpful to have that now, so. My inbox is open, you guys all have my contact if that's something you're interested in, but we'll keep you posted as it moves forward. Are there any other final questions before we?
What do you think the timeline of adopting something like this?
Totally up to the council. We've done a lot of back end work already with public process. Again, we've had the open house, we've done multiple meetings, but it went through a public hearing at the planning commission level, so we've done a lot of that already. But it is a big change, and so I don't think anyone takes that really lightly. I would guess maybe end of summer, early fall for a vote at the soonest, but the council has a lot going on right now. We've got a city manager who just retired. I don't know if you guys all heard Tim Tingy, retired from Cottonwood Heights. He's still working, but so there's kind of a lot moving right now, and I'm trying to not be too pushy with getting it on an agenda, so. Anyway, I think that's about all we had for this item, but any final questions before we wrap up this part?
I like it.
Good. Good. Well, I was just so excited to convene this group. It had been so long, so I'll turn it back over to our chair for the consent agenda portion, but appreciate you guys being so engaged.
Yes, thank you. So the consent agenda is for approval of the minutes. As we've done in the past, the Architecture Review Commission follows the process where they issue the minutes, they're emailed to the commission, and then you have 5 days to respond. And if there are no changes within that 5 days, then they would be approved. So we need a motion to approval of the minutes based on the process outlined in the paragraph on the agenda.
Minutes 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
back in October.
I don't know.
This is actually for tonight's minutes.
You approved tonight's
Oh,
minutes.
It's like a
Preemptive.
pre-approval.
Oh,
Yeah,
So you make a motion that
That's
pre-approves them
That's right.
barring any edits.
went along with that.
So you don't have to remember October.
Move to approve the minutes from this evening's meeting for the typical process.
thank you. We got a motion. Do we have a second?
Second,
Have a second? All in favor? Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Any other business?
Real quick, we have two commissioners, not here tonight, but are stepping down from the commission, Steve Harmon and Scott Henriksen. So just want to,
Scott is on Zoom.
Scott's here.
Henderson is on Zoom.
Yeah.
great, Scott.
I'm here. I'm sorry I ran late tonight and had to
Thank
do
you.
this from the office, so.
Yeah, well, we want to thank you for your service and wish you well as you kind of move on and into the future and just appreciate all you've done for this, for the city and the commission. The same with Steve.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much. It was a great opportunity to learn how these things work and be able to contribute a little bit. So thanks for the opportunity, and I'm sure the commission will do great things in the future.
We're gonna be down with Scott.
I know. That's what I was gonna say, we gotta find another
I'll
Scott.
add it to the eligibility requirements on our board. Yes, we will be sad to see both of those members go and hope you'll still be involved in the community. I think
Well,
that was it from staff's
that's all.
end. I'll just note before you go through the adjournment, motion, we tentatively have July 25th. I think it's gonna be canceled. The cutoff to be on a subsequent month's meeting is the month prior's meeting. So I did not receive any applications today. Also knowing the 24th of July holiday, that's a challenging time. So you can most likely expect a cancellation notice from me in coming weeks and maybe we'll get the band back together in August. But again, my proverbial door is always open. If you need me.
Thank you. And I also want to just express gratitude to both Scott and Steve for their service. They've done so for a long time and
Yeah, they have.
and contributed significantly to the commission and to the city. So thank you very much for your service, I think from all of us on the commission. With that, I'll request a motion to adjourn.
I'll request that.
Thank you. We have a motion to adjourn from Mills. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Was anyone else really warm?